Do you ever see on the news when something horrible has happened, somebody's done something horrendous, and reporters go out and interview neighbors or coworkers, and people say, but he was such a nice guy. No, he wasn't. Or they say, I don't know, he just snapped. No, he didn't. There are pre-incident indicators or threat indicators that are present, and either people don't see them or they're not in a position to see them, or they minimize them, or they don't recognize them as threat indicators. So I thought I'd do a series and use the Guelph letter bomber as an example and talk about threat indicators so that you can see for yourself and you can recognize these things in your own life and maybe help somebody else. This comes with a warning. When you do threat assessment, first of all, it's time limited. So somebody who might not be a threat today could be a threat tomorrow, depending on whether or not circumstances change. If a person has one or two or even three traits that are of concern, that doesn't necessarily mean, oh my gosh, they're a serial killer. It's dynamic. These things are related to each other, they play off of each other, and you have to also think about protective factors. So it's not an absolute, this means this and that's the end of it. Think of it like a combination lock. Think of a safe that's got a combination lock on it. Pandora's safe, because all the bad stuff's inside. All of those tumblers have to fall into place before that door opens. And you could have, say, 9 out of 10 tumblers fall into place and the 10th one doesn't, or there's a protective factor that prevents that last tumbler from falling into place. And even though all those traits are there, the person doesn't act on them. Or, you know, you've got the tumblers in place and you have a protective factor and you take away that protective factor, then all of a sudden, you know, what's there kind of blows up. So it looks like the person just snapped, but they didn't. So let's use the Guelph letter bomber as an example. This guy sent 3 bombs to 3 different people and was on his way to finish off one of the victims who didn't die when the police surrounded him and picked him up. Prior to that, he sent poisoned water to a number of people. Prior to that, he was in trouble for harassment of people. Prior to that, he had trouble where he was renting. So this guy had like a 20-year history. He didn't wake up one day and think, oh, I think I'll send some bombs to some people. There were indications along the way. And so I thought we'd talk about some of those because these are some things that we use in threat assessment. One of those things, if you go back, and I can only go back as far as the public record, is that he was very rigid. So he had problems with his roommate, and the roommate was actually one of the victims that he sent a bomb to. And they were stupid things like, you know, the roommate was talking too loud, or it was just stupid stuff. But this guy, this offender, was so rigid that he couldn't handle anything different than the way he wanted it. Rigidness by itself is not an indication of threat. However, rigidness is an indication to you that you should have maybe a closer look, because it's very often tied in with the need to control. If the rigidness is tied to control, so the need to control other people, then that's a concern. This guy needed to control other people. And I was going to just show you clips, and I think I'm not going to do that. I'll let you look at that video. The link's in the description. I'll let you have a look and see if you can spot these elements that I'm talking about. So one of those is a need for control of other people. And sometimes that control comes out of, you know, like, I need to control because I have a sense of entitlement and everything should go my way. Sometimes it's a sense of righteousness, which this guy also had, where, no, this is the right way to do it, and you have to do it. And sometimes it's straight out a need for power, and a need for power over other people. People who are in positions of power can hide this a little better than people who aren't. So when you see a boss controlling everything, you think, well, you know, that's his job to control everything. So you need to look for those indicators elsewhere, because they'll pop up. The need for power and control comes up a lot, I'd say all the time, in domestic violence cases. It comes up in sexual assaults. It comes up in workplace violence cases, revenge cases. So need for control is a big red flag. If you have just that, that's enough to be concerned, because people who need control and then act on that, they will manipulate, they will play the victim, they will do all sorts of things in order to exert that control. Sense of self-righteousness is closely tied to justification. And in order for somebody to commit a crime, they need to somehow justify it in their mind. In order for them to harass or hurt another person or steal something, they have to feel justified in some way. Whether it makes sense to you and I or not is a different thing. It has to make sense to them. So this sense of justification gives them permission. Sometimes the sense of self-righteousness is tied to religiosity. And I'm not saying that if you have a religious belief that means anything. It doesn't. This is very different. Some people will use their religion as a way to guide their own decisions and give them strength and navigate the world. And some people use religion as a cudgel, and that ties into that self-righteousness. So the religiosity isn't actually a true sort of spiritual practice. It's a way to lord over others, or a way to try and control others, and it's a weapon. Self-righteousness is tied to sense of entitlement, and sense of entitlement is tied into, again, that justification. So it shows itself in a lot of ways. I mean, some people will just come right out and say, yeah, well, I deserve to have that, whatever it is I want, or that person deserves to suffer. Sometimes it's a little more subtle. Take, for example, somebody who thinks that they own other people. Look at the difference between, that's my wife, or that's my wife. One of the things we look at is if a subject has a sense of ownership or proprietorship over another human being, and that's always a big red flag. And again, that leads into the justification, which gives them permission to act on what they're thinking they might want to do. So we've got need for control, sense of self-righteousness, a sense of entitlement, and justification. If you go back and look through the video and see if you can spot those things in that particular offender, and maybe in some other people you know. See if you can spot those things. Those are 4 really big red flags, and absent any protective factors, and I don't mean security necessarily, Protective factors can also be things like support for that subject who's doing these things. Absent protective factors, then that's a concern.